year was 1855, and the winter had been one of the harshest in living memory for the residents of South Devon in the United Kingdom. Thick, heavy snow had fallen continuously for days, blanketing the rolling hills and quaint villages in a suffocating layer of white silence. It was the night of February 8th when the final heavy blizzard struck, burying the landscape under yet more frost and ice. The wind howled through the chimneys of the stone cottages, and the temperature plummeted to levels that made the very air feel like broken glass in the lungs of anyone foolish enough to step outside. But it was not the cold that would chill the blood of the locals. When the sun finally rose the next morning, it was something far more sinister that had been left behind in the pristine snow. As the pale dawn light broke over the towns of Topsham and Dawlish and Exmouth, the villagers began to emerge from their homes to clear the heavy drifts that blocked their doorways. The silence of the morning was profound, broken only by the scrape of shovels against the frozen ground. Henry Piggott, a local baker in the village of Topsham, was among the first to step out into the biting cold. He pulled his coat tight against the chill and looked out across the expanse of white that covered his garden. His eyes were drawn to a strange line of markings that cut across the smooth surface of the snow. They were not the paw prints of a dog or the tracks of a fox, but something entirely alien to the natural world he knew. Henry Piggott walked closer to inspect the anomalies and felt a shiver run down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. The marks were shaped distinctly like a cloven hoof, but they were arranged in a single straight line, one directly in front of the other. It was as if a bipedal creature with the feet of a goat had walked with the precision of a tightrope walker across the garden. Each print was exactly 4 inches long and 3 inches across, and they were spaced with a mathematical consistency of 8 inches apart. The most unsettling detail was the clarity of the impressions. Despite the freezing temperatures, the snow inside the prints appeared to have been melted or seared by a heat source that defied explanation. News of the strange discovery spread rapidly through the village of Topsham, and soon neighbors were gathering to stare at the impossible tracks. It quickly became apparent that Henry Piggott was not the only one to have been visited by the unknown entity. The single line of footprints continued out of his garden and stretched through the village, crossing roads and fields without deviation. The villagers began to follow the trail, and their unease turned to genuine fear as the true scale of the phenomenon became clear. The tracks did not just cover the village of Topsham, but seemed to extend for miles in every direction, covering a vast area of South Devon that was separated by the wide estuary of the river Exe. The trail of the entity ignored all physical obstacles that would have stopped a natural animal or a human being. Where the tracks encountered a high stone wall, did not turn aside or search for a gate. Instead, the prince continued directly up the vertical face of the masonry and appeared on the snow-covered top before descending down the other side. The spacing remained exactly 8 inches apart, even during this impossible ascent and descent. It was as if the creature possessed the ability to walk through gravity itself, or simply floated over the obstructions, while merely tapping the surfaces to leave its mark. The villagers stared at the walls in disbelief, unable to comprehend what manner of beast could perform such a feat. As the search parties expanded their range, they found that the footprints crossed over the roofs of houses and traversed tall haystacks without disturbing the loose material. In one particularly chilling instance, the tracks led directly into a narrow drain pipe with a diameter of only 6 inches. The prince emerged on the other side of the drain, as if the creature had compressed its physical form to slip through the tight space before resuming its relentless march across the frozen fields. This detail suggested a shape-shifting capability, or a lack of solid form, that terrified the practical minds of the Victorian farmers and laborers. The creature seemed to be mocking the laws of physics and biology. With every step it took, the mystery deepened when the trail reached the banks of the river Exe, which was roughly 2 miles wide at that point. The water was not frozen solid enough to support weight, yet the tracks stopped abruptly at the edge of the water and resumed instantly on the opposite bank. The alignment was perfect, as if the creature had leaped the entire 2-mile distance in a single bound, or flown across the dark, churning waters. This fact eliminated the possibility of a prank or a hoax, for no human could cross such a distance unseen and leave no trace of a boat or a bridge. The continuity of the trail on both sides of the estuary suggested a singular, purposeful journey by a powerful entity. Panic began to set in across the region as reports flooded in from the towns of Teignmouth and Dawlish and Totnes. The footprints were found in gardens and enclosed courtyards that were locked from the inside. They were found on the tops of church towers and deep within dense woodlands. The total distance covered by the tracks was estimated to be over 100 miles, a distance that no known animal could traverse in a single winter night. The sheer endurance required to walk such a path through deep snow and over treacherous terrain suggested a supernatural stamina. The villagers bolted their doors and shuttered their windows, fearing that the creature might return when the sun went down. The local clergy were quickly summoned to offer an explanation and to calm the rising hysteria of the populace. Reverend Henry Ellicombe, the vicar of Clist St. George, was a man of learning and reason, but even he struggled to find a rational explanation for what he saw. He examined the prints closely and noted the cloven shape, which in Christian theology was the unmistakable sign of Satan. The whispers began to circulate the devil himself had walked over Devon that night looking for sinners to drag down to hell. The dark implication was that the protection of the church had failed, and evil was roaming freely among the God-fearing people of the countryside. Sunday services that week were packed to overflowing, as terrified residents sought sanctuary and spiritual protection. The sermons were filled with warnings about the wages of sin and the need for immediate repentance. The priests used the phenomenon to drive home the reality of the spiritual war that was being waged for their souls. They spoke of the footprints as a warning from the Almighty or a taunt from the adversary. The atmosphere in the churches was thick with dread, and every creak of the wooden pews sounded like the footfall of the unseen visitor. The psychological impact of the event was profound, turning a peaceful rural community into a landscape of paranoia. Despite the prevailing fear, there were those who sought a scientific or natural explanation for the event. Some naturalists suggested that the tracks were made by badgers or otters roaming for food in the scarce winter. They argued that the snow had melted and refrozen, distorting the shape of the prints to look like hooves. However, this theory failed to account for the single line formation and the impossible obstacles that had been traversed. No badger could walk in a straight line for 100 miles, nor could an otter scale a 14-foot wall or leap across a 2-mile estuary. The scientific explanations rang hollow against the physical evidence that lay frozen in the snow. Another theory proposed that a weather balloon had dragged a rope and a shackle across the landscape, creating the rhythmic impressions. This idea was debated fiercely in the local taverns and town halls. While it could explain the ability to cross walls and rivers, it could not explain the consistent pressure of the prints, or the fact that they never got snagged on trees or chimneys. Furthermore, a trailing rope would have left a drag mark between the prints, but the snow between each step was pristine and undisturbed. The mechanical precision of the spacing also contradicted the erratic movement of a balloon caught in a winter gale. The balloon theory was soon discarded by most. The most unsettling aspect of the footprints was the feeling of being watched that descended upon the region. Farmers reported that their livestock had been unusually agitated during the night of the 8th, refusing to leave their barns or making strange noises in the dark. Dogs, which were usually eager to hunt or track, were found cowering in corners, whimpering, as if they sensed a predator that they could not fight. The animals seemed to possess an instinctual awareness of the unnatural presence that had passed through their territory. This reaction from the beasts of the field only served to reinforce the belief that the visitor was not of this world. As the days passed, the snow began to melt, and the physical evidence of the devil's footprints began to fade into the mud. But the psychological scar remained etched into the minds of the people of Devon. They looked with suspicion, wondering if one of them had summoned the dark entity. Old feuds were reignited, and accusations of witchcraft and devil worship began to surface in the quiet corners of the villages. The footprint event had cracked the veneer of civilized society, revealing the primal superstitions that still lurked beneath the surface of the Victorian era. The melting snow revealed not just the earth, but the fragility of their safety. News of the phenomenon reached the national press in London, and reporters flocked to Devon to document the story. The Illustrated London News published sketches of the tracks and interviewed eyewitnesses, bringing the mystery to a wider audience. The attention brought a mix of curiosity seekers and amateur detectives to the region, all hoping to solve the riddle. However, the influx of outsiders only added to the tension. The locals were wary of strangers and tired of being treated as simpletons by the sophisticated city folk. They knew what they had seen, and they knew that no amount of rationalization from London could explain away the fear they felt. One particularly gruesome rumor began to circulate, involving a local landowner who had been known for his blasphemous ways. It was said that the tracks had circled his house 3 times before moving on, as if marking him for a future reckoning. The man was reportedly found dead shortly after the snow melted his face frozen in a rictus of terror. While there was no official record to corroborate this tale, it became part of the folklore surrounding the event. It served as a morality tale, warning the youth of Devon that the devil was always watching, and that he knew exactly where the sinners lived. In the village of Dawlish, a group of armed men decided to form a watch to guard against the return of the creature. They patrolled the dark lanes with muskets and lanterns, jumping at shadows and challenging anyone who walked the streets at night. The atmosphere was one of a siege, with the enemy being an invisible force that could be anywhere and nowhere at once. The vigilantes found nothing but the wind and the cold, but their presence did little to reassure the women and children who huddled in their beds, listening to the footsteps of the guards and wondering if they were human or something else. Years turned into decades, and the mystery of the devil's footprints remained unsolved. The story was passed down from generation to generation, becoming a staple of local history and a favorite tale to tell around the fire on winter nights. Grandparents would tell their grandchildren about the time the devil walked through Devon, and the children would look out the window at the snow, wondering if the cloven hoofs would appear again. The event became a defining moment for the region, a shared trauma that bound the communities together in a legacy of mystery. The footprints had faded, but the impression they left on the culture was permanent. Modern researchers have revisited the case countless times, attempting to apply 21st century science to the 19th century puzzle. Theories involving experimental kangaroos escaped from private zoos were proposed, but quickly dismissed due to lack of evidence. Suggestions of mass hysteria were analyzed, but the physical reality of the thousands of prints seen by hundreds of independent witnesses made it difficult to dismiss as a collective hallucination. The consistency of the descriptions from widely separated villages argued for a tangible, objective phenomenon rather than a trick of the mind. The mystery stubbornly refused to be solved. Some historians pointed to the atmospheric conditions of that winter as a possible key. They suggested that an unusual combination of freezing rain and wind vortices could have created the markings. However, meteorologists have stated that while wind can create strange shapes in snow, it cannot create a single linear trail that traverses obstacles with intelligence. The randomness of nature stands in stark contrast to the deliberate, orderly progression of the footprints. Nature does not walk in a straight line for 100 miles, ignoring the topography of the land. The argument for an intelligent agent remained the most compelling. There is a chilling account from a similar event that occurred in the Kerguelen Islands in the Indian Ocean only a few years before the Devon incident. Explorers there reported seeing identical hoof marks in the snow where no known animal existed. This connection suggested a global phenomenon rather than a localized anomaly. It hinted that whatever entity was responsible was not bound by geography and could manifest in the most remote corners of the earth. The idea that this was a wandering force moving across the globe added a layer of cosmic horror to the story. It was not just a local haunting, but a visitation from something vast. The house where Henry Piggott lived in Topsham became a site of curiosity for years. People would stop to look at the garden wall where the tracks had first been seen. Piggott himself never profited from the attention and often refused to speak of it in his later years. He seemed to regret being the one to discover the marks, feeling that it had marked him personally. Those who knew him said he changed after that morning, becoming more withdrawn and spending long hours staring out at the river. The encounter with the inexplicable had taken a toll on his spirit, leaving him with questions that faith could not answer. In the archives of the British Museum, there are letters from the residents of Devon written during the weeks following the event. These letters reveal the raw emotion and the genuine confusion of the people. They describe the sleepless nights and the prayers recited to ward off evil. The handwriting is often shaky and the tone is desperate. These primary sources provide a window into the psyche of a population under siege by the unknown. They strip away the romanticism of the ghost story and reveal the stark terror of living through an event that defies reality. The fear on those pages is palpable. One letter written by a woman in Totnes describes a sound she heard on the night of the blizzard. She wrote of a rhythmic tapping on her roof, like the sound of a hammer hitting wet wood. She hid under her covers, too afraid to investigate. The next morning, she found the cloven prints running along the ridge of her cottage. The realization that the creature had been directly above her while she slept haunted her for the rest of her life. She moved away from Devon the following spring, unable to spend another winter in a house that had been walked upon by the devil. The phenomenon also challenged the rigid class structures of Victorian England. For a brief moment, the wealthy landowner and the poor laborer were united in their fear. The devil did not discriminate between the slate roof of a mansion and the thatch of a cottage. The tracks went over both with equal indifference. This shared vulnerability created a temporary leveling of society, where the only thing that mattered was whether one's soul was safe. The aristocracy found that their high walls and iron gates offered no protection against an intruder that could simply step over them. Skeptics often point to the lack of photographs as a weakness in the evidence. But photography in 1855 was a complex and slow process not suited for capturing details in the snow before they melted. The reliance on sketches and written testimony was a necessity of the time. However, the sketches that do exist are remarkably consistent across different locations. They all show the same U-shaped hoof mark and the same narrow spacing. This consistency across independent sources reinforces the validity of the observations. The people were drawing what they saw, and what they saw was identical. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the devil's footprints became a legend of the Victorian age, a relic of a more superstitious time. But every time a heavy snow falls in Devon, the old stories are whispered again. People check their gardens in the morning with a mix of anticipation and dread. The memory of 1855 serves as a reminder that the world is not as fully understood as we like to believe. There are still corners of the dark where science has no light to shed, and where the old fears are justified. The legend also serves as a testament to the power of the unknown to disrupt the orderly flow of life. In a century defined by industrial progress and the triumph of reason, the Devon incident was a stark anomaly. It was a chaotic element that refused to be categorized or controlled. It humbled the proud engineers and the learned scholars, reminding them that nature or supernature still held the upper hand. The footprints were a silent mockery of the human attempt to tame the world. They said clearly that there were paths we could not follow and walkers we could not name. To this day, there is no plaque or monument marking the spot where the tracks began or ended, for no one knows where they truly started or finished. The trail simply appeared out of the void and vanished back into it. This lack of a beginning and an end is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. It suggests that the entity simply stepped into our reality for a brief time, and then stepped out again. It implies that the barrier between our world and the next is thinner than we think, and that things can cross over when the conditions are right. The final analysis of the devil's footprints leaves us with a sense of lingering unease. We want answers. We want to know it was a balloon or a badger or a hoax. We crave a solution that fits into our logical framework. But the devil's footprints deny us that comfort. They remain a defiant question mark in the history of the paranormal. They stand as a silent witness to a night when the impossible became real, and the safe world of the everyday was violated by the footsteps of the unknown. And in the silence of a snowy night in Devon, one can almost hear the soft, rhythmic crunch of hooves, walking where no man can tread. Even now, when the wind blows from the east and the frost settles on the moors, the old-timers in Devon will tell you to lock your doors. They say that the devil never walks the same path twice, but he never stops walking either. The footprints may have melted away into the earth, but the path they traced is still there, invisible and waiting. The story of the devil's footprints is not just a ghost story from the past. It is a warning for the future, a reminder that in the deepest winter, when the world is white and silent, we are never truly alone. The legacy of that night is a permanent scar on the landscape of folklore. It challenges us to look at the snow not just as a beautiful blanket, but as a canvas for the unseen. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the depth of our fears. The devil's footprints are a mysterious phenomenon that will likely never be solved, and perhaps that is for the best. For if we knew what truly walked across Devon that night, we might never sleep soundly again. The mystery is the only shield we have against the horror of the truth. So the next time you wake to a world covered in fresh snow, take a moment before you step outside. Look closely at the pristine white surface. Check for the marks that do not belong. Look for the single line of prints that march relentlessly towards your home, and pray that you see only the tracks of the birds and the foxes. For if you see the cloven hoofs appearing out of nowhere, you will know that the visitor from 1855 has returned, and that the long winter night is far from over. The dread you feel then will be the same dread that gripped Henry Piggott on that cold morning so long ago. The story ends as it began, with the silence of the snow. The wind erases the evidence of our passing, and time erases the memory of our fear. But some marks go deeper than the snow. Some footprints press down into the very soul of a place, leaving an impression that no thaw can melt. The devil's footprints remain the ultimate unsolved mystery of the Victorian winter, a chilling reminder that the dark is vast and full of things that walk with a purpose we cannot comprehend. And somewhere out there, in the cold dark, Void the Walker is still marching one step after another forever. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the sound of those hoofbeats on the roof. Imagine the entity pausing at your chimney, breathing in the scent of your fear. The story of the devil's footprints is not over. It is merely waiting for the next heavy snow. It is waiting for the next time the world is quiet enough to hear the footsteps of the damned. Sleep well, if you can, but keep one ear open for the crunch of the snow. The devil may be done with Devon, but he is never done with the world. The footprints are his signature, and he has not yet finished writing his masterpiece of terror.